Maya Chun chose the corner booth at Maggie's Diner because it offered clear sight lines to both entrances while keeping her back protected. The late afternoon sun streamed through dusty windows, illuminating the worn vinyl seats and cracked formica tables that had served this military town for decades. She adjusted her simple gray sweater and returned to her paperback novel, savoring the rare moment of peace between assignments. The bell above the front door chimed as 3 Marines burst through, their voices carrying the aggressive confidence that came from completing another brutal training session at Camp Pendleton. Staff Sergeant Kevin Jackson led the group, his thick shoulders straining against his workout shirt while sweat still darkened the fabric around his collar. Behind him, Corporals Torres and Rodriguez matched his swaggering pace, their conversation punctuated by crude laughter that turned heads throughout the small establishment. Jackson's eyes swept the diner before settling on Maya's solitary figure. His expression shifted from casual observation to something harder, more predatory. He nudged Torres with his elbow and jerked his chin toward her table. The 3 Marines exchanged knowing looks that spoke of shared intentions without requiring words. Maya sensed their attention, but maintained her focus on the page before her, where a fictional detective was unraveling clues that would soon expose a killer's identity. She had learned long ago that avoiding eye contact often discouraged unwanted interactions, though something about the quality of silence behind her suggested these men would not be easily deterred. Jackson approached her table with the deliberate stride of someone accustomed to having his presence acknowledged. His shadow fell across her book as he stopped beside her booth, close enough that she could smell the acrid combination of gymnasium sweat and cheap cologne. When she failed to look up immediately, his jaw tightened with the first spark of irritation. "You know, sweetheart," Jackson said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet diner, "this section is usually reserved for military personnel, real soldiers who've earned the right to eat in peace after serving their country." Maya marked her place with a finger and glanced up, meeting his stare with calm brown eyes that revealed nothing of her thoughts. "I'm sorry," she replied evenly, "but I don't see any reserved seating signs. The hostess seated me here when I arrived." Jackson's irritation flared into something approaching anger at her measured response. He had expected deference, perhaps fear, certainly not this quiet resistance from someone he had immediately categorized as a harmless civilian. His friends moved closer, forming a loose semicircle around her table that blocked her exit route, while making their intentions unmistakably clear. "Maybe you didn't hear me correctly," Jackson continued, his voice dropping to a more threatening register. "I said this area is for people who've actually contributed something to this country's defense. People who've put their lives on the line while others stayed home playing it safe." Maya closed her book carefully and placed it on the table beside her untouched coffee cup. "I heard you perfectly," she said, maintaining the same calm tone that had apparently infuriated him further. "I'm simply choosing to remain where the restaurant staff placed me. If you have concerns about seating arrangements, perhaps you should speak with management." The suggestion that he should appeal to civilian authority rather than simply taking what he wanted pushed Jackson past the threshold of restraint. His face flushed red as he leaned forward, placing both palms flat on her table in a gesture designed to intimidate through proximity and implied physical threat. "Listen here, princess," he snarled, his breath hot against her face. "I don't think you understand how things work in a military town. When real warriors need space, civilians move. That's just basic respect for the people who keep you safe at night." Maya's expression never changed, though anyone trained in reading microexpressions might have noticed the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was making calculations behind that serene facade. "I appreciate your service," she said quietly, "but I'm going to finish my coffee and leave when I'm ready. I'm not looking for trouble with anyone." The phrase "I'm not looking for trouble" struck Jackson as admission of weakness rather than attempted de-escalation. His confidence surged as he interpreted her words as confirmation that she could be pushed, intimidated, forced to submit to his will through nothing more than aggressive posturing and implied violence. "Where are you from anyway, Maya Chun?" I'm curious about what kind of person thinks military bases and their surrounding areas are just tourist destinations for civilians to hang out and take up space. The fact that he had somehow learned her name sent a small chill through the diner's other patrons, though Maya herself showed no visible reaction to this revelation. She simply took a measured sip of her coffee and waited for him to continue whatever performance he felt compelled to complete. Jackson's satisfaction deepened as he watched Maya's careful composure, interpreting her silence as evidence that his intimidation tactics were working. He straightened up and gestured to Torres, who had been watching the confrontation with growing excitement. The unspoken communication between them carried the weight of countless previous encounters where civilians had crumbled under similar pressure. Torres moved toward the counter where 3 chocolate milkshakes sat waiting, their thick consistency and dark color making them perfect weapons for humiliation rather than refreshment. He lifted 2 of the tall glasses, condensation dripping from their sides, and carried them back to where Jackson stood over Maya's table like a predator savoring the moment before striking. Rodriguez positioned himself near the diner's other occupied tables, his presence serving as a silent warning to potential witnesses that intervention would not be welcome. The handful of other patrons, mostly elderly locals and a single truck driver, seemed to shrink into their seats as they recognized the dangerous shift in atmosphere that preceded violence. Maya observed these movements with the peripheral awareness of someone accustomed to tracking multiple threats simultaneously, though she maintained her focus on the book she had reopened. The fictional detective was now confronting the killer in a warehouse, unaware that backup was still minutes away and that survival depended entirely on quick thinking and precise action. "You know what I think your problem is," Jackson announced, his voice carrying clearly through the now-silent diner. "I think you've never learned proper respect for the people who keep this country safe. Maybe it's time someone taught you a lesson about gratitude." He reached for his milkshake with deliberate slowness, lifting the heavy glass until it hovered directly above Maya's head. The chocolate mixture inside seemed almost black in the dim light, thick enough to coat everything it touched with sticky humiliation that would take hours to properly clean. Maya glanced up from her book, meeting his eyes with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the encounter. She made no move to protect herself, no plea for mercy, no acknowledgement that she understood what was about to happen. Her stillness seemed to unnerve Jackson for a moment before his anger reasserted itself. "Here's your lesson in respect, princess." The milkshake descended in a thick, cold cascade that covered Maya's dark hair and ran down her face in chocolate rivulets. The impact splattered across her sweater and soaked into the pages of her book, turning the detective's story into a soggy, unreadable mess. Chunks of ice cream clung to her shoulders while the liquid pooled on the table and dripped steadily onto the floor. Jackson's laughter exploded through the silent diner as he stepped back to admire his handiwork. Torres and Rodriguez joined in with enthusiastic approval, their voices creating a harsh soundtrack of masculine satisfaction that contrasted sharply with the soft, dripping sounds of milkshake hitting linoleum. The elderly woman in the corner booth gasped audibly, her hand flying to cover her mouth in shock. The truck driver started to rise from his seat, his face flushed with anger, but Rodriguez's warning glare convinced him to settle back down. The teenage waitress behind the counter stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she had witnessed. Maya sat perfectly still as chocolate continued to drip from her hair onto her ruined clothing. She blinked once to clear her eyes, then calmly reached for the napkin dispenser on her table. Her movements remained steady and controlled as she began the methodical process of cleaning her face, starting with her forehead and working downward. "That's what happens when civilians don't show proper appreciation," Jackson announced to the room, his chest swelling with pride at his demonstration of power. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before taking up space that belongs to real Americans who've earned it." Maya dabbed chocolate from her cheek and glanced toward the counter where the waitress remained motionless. "Excuse me," she said in the same calm voice she had used throughout the encounter, "could I please have a few more napkins? These won't be sufficient." The matter-of-fact nature of her request seemed to deflate Jackson's triumph slightly. He had expected tears, anger, humiliation, or at least some acknowledgement that he had successfully broken her composure. Instead, she was treating his assault as nothing more than a minor inconvenience requiring additional cleaning supplies. Jackson's frustration began building again as he watched her continue the careful cleaning process. Her lack of visible distress felt like a personal insult, as though she was somehow cheating him of the satisfaction he had earned through his dominance display. The other Marines sensed his mood shifting and moved closer, ready to escalate further if necessary. "You think this is funny," Maya said quietly, her attention focused on removing Milkshake from her sleeves. "You think humiliating strangers in public makes you look strong or important. But all you've really demonstrated is that you're the kind of person who attacks people who can't fight back." The observation hit Jackson like a physical blow, primarily because its accuracy threatened the self-image he had constructed around his military service. He had spent years telling himself that his aggressive behavior towards civilians was justified by his sacrifices in uniform. But her words stripped away that comfortable rationalization. "Who says you can't fight back?" Jackson snarled, his anger reigniting with dangerous intensity. "You want to try teaching me a lesson, sweetheart? Because I'd be happy to show you exactly what happens when civilians get mouthy with Marines." Maya looked up from her cleaning efforts, chocolate still clinging to her hair, and met his challenge with eyes that seemed older and more calculating than they had moments before. "I said I wasn't looking for trouble," she replied evenly. "I never said I couldn't handle it if it found me anyway." The diner's front door chimed again as Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams entered, his dress blue uniform crisp and perfectly pressed for the afternoon ceremony at base headquarters. The polished brass buttons caught the afternoon light, while his ribbons told the story of deployments across 3 different theaters, each colored strip representing months of service in places most civilians could never pronounce. Williams paused in the doorway as the scene before him registered in his trained observer's mind. The laughter from Jackson's group had an ugly quality that immediately set his instincts on alert, while the chocolate-covered woman in the corner booth presented a tableau that demanded explanation. His eyes swept the room, cataloging the positions of witnesses, the body language of participants, and the electric tension that preceded either violence or revelation. Jackson noticed the newcomer and straightened slightly, recognizing another NCO, despite his focus on tormenting Maya. The presence of a witness in uniform added a new dynamic to the situation, though Jackson's confidence remained unshaken. After all, he was demonstrating proper military values by putting a disrespectful civilian in her place. Maya continued her methodical cleaning process, now working on removing chocolate chunk from her hair with the systematic efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with messy situations. Williams watched her movements with growing fascination, noting the precise way she folded each used napkin and the controlled breathing that suggested training in stress management techniques. Something about her posture triggered a memory fragment in Williams' mind, though he could not immediately place where he might have seen the particular combination of alertness and apparent vulnerability. The way she held her shoulders despite being covered in Milkshake reminded him of briefings he had attended, though the specific context remained frustratingly elusive. Jackson's voice cut through Williams' observations as he addressed the room again. "See, this is what happens when people don't understand military culture," he announced, clearly performing for his new audience. "Civilians think they can just waltz into our spaces and demand equal treatment without earning it through service." Williams approached the scene with the careful steps of someone entering a situation that had already escalated beyond simple disagreement. His training in de-escalation kicked in automatically as he assessed the power dynamics and potential outcomes. The chocolate-covered woman appeared calm despite her circumstances, while Jackson radiated the aggressive energy of someone who had crossed lines and was now committed to justifying his actions. "Excuse me," Williams said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Is everyone all right here? It looks like there might have been some kind of accident." Jackson turned toward Williams with the easy confidence of someone who believed his actions would be supported by another service member. "No accident, Sergeant," he replied with a grin that revealed how much he was enjoying the situation. "Just a little education about respect for the people who serve this country." Williams' attention shifted to Maya, who had paused in her cleaning to observe this new development. He studied her face more carefully now, noting the small scar above her left eyebrow that seemed familiar, though he could not place it in his memory. Her eyes met his briefly, and in that moment he caught something that made his pulse quicken with recognition he could not quite name. "Ma'am," Williams said directly to Maya, "do you need any assistance? I'd be happy to call base security if there's been an incident here." Maya looked up from her napkin work, chocolate still streaking down one cheek, and considered his offer with the same measured calm she had maintained throughout the encounter. "Thank you for asking," she replied, her voice carrying a slight hoarseness that might have been emotion or simply the result of milkshake coating her throat. "The situation is handled." The phrase "situation is handled" struck Williams as oddly formal for a civilian describing what appeared to be a random assault. Military personnel used that specific terminology in after-action reports, but civilians typically express themselves in more emotional terms when describing traumatic experiences. His suspicion that something deeper was occurring began crystallizing into certainty. Jackson interpreted Maya's response as confirmation that she would not be filing complaints or seeking help from authorities. His satisfaction returned as he realized this encounter would end with his complete victory and no consequences for his actions. He had successfully demonstrated his dominance while teaching a valuable lesson about civilian military hierarchy. Williams remained beside their table, his instincts screaming that he was missing crucial information about the woman who was calmly cleaning chocolate from her hair. The combination of her composure under stress, her precise word choices, and that nagging sense of recognition created a puzzle that demanded solving. "You know," Williams said carefully, addressing Maya again, "you look familiar. Have we met before? Maybe at one of the base functions or community events?" Maya paused in her cleaning and looked at him more directly, her brown eyes showing a flicker of something that might have been amusement or calculation. "I don't attend many social events," she replied. "I tend to keep a low profile when I'm between assignments." The phrase "between assignments" sent another jolt of recognition through Williams' mind. Civilians talked about jobs or unemployment, but assignments suggested a completely different type of career path. Combined with her bearing and responses, the pieces were beginning to form a picture that made Jackson's behavior not just inappropriate, but potentially catastrophic. Jackson missed these subtle cues entirely. His attention focused on the immediate satisfaction of having successfully humiliated someone he perceived as weak. He turned back to Torres and Rodriguez, already beginning to plan their next move in what he saw as a completely controlled situation. Williams stepped closer to Maya's table, lowering his voice slightly. "Ma'am, I know this might sound strange, but I feel like I should know you from somewhere. Your face is really familiar, and I'm usually good with remembering people I've served with." Maya's hand stilled on the napkin she was holding, and for the first time since the milkshake attack, her composure showed the slightest crack. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth as she realized that someone in the room was finally beginning to see past her civilian disguise to the person underneath. "I'm sure we'll figure it out," she said quietly, checking her watch with movements that Williams now recognized as distinctly military in their precision. "My transport should be arriving soon anyway." Jackson's triumph grew as he watched Maya continue her cleaning efforts, convinced that her calm demeanor was simply shock wearing off before the inevitable breakdown. He gestured to Torres, who moved toward the counter to collect the remaining milkshakes from their earlier order. The chocolate-stained woman had provided excellent entertainment, but Jackson felt the demonstration could use an encore performance to really drive home his point about civilian respect. Rodriguez laughed as he recalled their previous adventures in asserting military superiority. "Remember that incident last month at Murphy's bar?" he said loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "That college kid thought He could mouth off about military spending until we showed him some real-world education. Torres nodded enthusiastically while lifting 2 fresh milkshakes from the counter. And that construction worker who tried to get smart about veteran benefits, he added. Amazing how quickly people learn respect when they realize they're dealing with actual warriors instead of weekend patriots. Maya absorbed their conversation while continuing her methodical cleaning process, her movements never varying in speed or precision despite the revelations about their pattern of targeting civilians. She checked her tactical watch again, noting that 14 minutes had passed since her last communication. The timepiece's military specifications were lost on Jackson, who saw only an expensive accessory that raised new questions about her background. How does a waitress afford a watch like that? Jackson demanded, his suspicion finally overriding his satisfaction at having humiliated her. That's a $5,000 piece of equipment, not something you pick up working at diners and coffee shops. Maya glanced down at the watch that had survived 3 combat deployments without losing accuracy, its titanium case bearing microscopic scratches that told stories she could never share with civilians. It was a gift, she replied simply, offering no additional details that might satisfy his curiosity or escalate his aggression further. Jackson's paranoia began building as he processed the implications of her expensive equipment and evasive answers. A gift from who? He pressed, moving closer to her table again. Military contractors don't just hand out gear to random civilians. Someone with serious connections gave you that watch. Maya folded another chocolate-stained napkin with hospital corner precision, a habit ingrained through years of military training that she maintained even in civilian settings. I prefer not to discuss personal gifts, she said, maintaining the same neutral tone that had frustrated him since their encounter began. Torres approached with the fresh milkshakes, their cream-topped surfaces unmarred by the violence that had consumed the first round. Jackson's eyes lit up as he contemplated a second demonstration of power, this time focused on extracting answers about Maya's mysterious background rather than simply humiliating her for entertainment. Williams watched these developments with growing alarm as his recognition of Maya's military bearing became impossible to ignore. The way she folded napkins, checked her watch, and maintained situational awareness while appearing to focus on cleaning suggested training that went far beyond basic civilian self-defense courses. Maya's phone buzzed against the table, the military-grade case protecting it from the chocolate that had splattered across every other surface. She glanced at the message display, which showed a brief text that made Jackson lean forward to read over her shoulder. Transport ETA 1,400 hours, the message read, using the 24-hour format that immediately confirmed Williams' suspicions about her background. Who uses military time in text messages? Jackson demanded, his voice carrying a new edge of uncertainty that hadn't been present during his earlier dominance display. Civilians don't talk about 1,400 hours unless they're trying to sound important. Maya angled her phone away from his view while typing a brief response, her thumbs moving with the efficiency of someone accustomed to communicating critical information quickly and accurately. Personal business, she replied when Jackson continued staring at her with growing suspicion and decreasing confidence. The phone rang moments later with a tone that Williams recognized as the standard military communication alert. Maya answered on the second ring with a response that sent shockwaves through everyone within hearing distance. "Chun here," she said in a voice that carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to receiving orders from high-ranking officials. Jackson's face went pale as he processed the military-style phone response, while Torres nearly dropped the milkshakes he was carrying. Rodriguez stepped closer to their table, his earlier confidence evaporating as the implications of Maya's communication style became impossible to ignore. "Roger that." Maya continued into the phone, her posture straightening slightly as she received whatever instructions were being transmitted. ETA confirmed at 1400, understood. Will maintain current position until pickup arrives. Williams felt his stomach drop as the pieces finally clicked into place in his memory. The scar above her left eyebrow, the bearing, the precise movements, and now the phone protocol created a picture that made Jackson's assault not just inappropriate, but potentially career-ending for everyone involved. Jackson tried to process what he was hearing while maintaining his grip on the narrative that had justified his actions. Civilians didn't receive transport coordination from military sources, and they certainly didn't acknowledge orders with phrases like "Roger that" and "understood." His certainty about Maya's weakness began crumbling as evidence mounted that he had seriously misjudged the situation. Maya ended her call and returned her attention to the chocolate removal process, but Jackson could no longer interpret her calm as vulnerability. The woman who had accepted his assault without resistance was now revealing layers of military protocol that suggested training and connections far beyond anything he had anticipated. Williams stepped closer to Maya's table, his recognition now complete, but his disbelief still struggling to accept what his training told him was obvious. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying new respect that Jackson couldn't understand. "I believe we may have met at the Joint Operations briefing 6 months ago. You were presenting intelligence analysis for Operation Desert Falcon." Maya looked up from her napkin work, chocolate still streaking her face, and met William's eyes with an expression that confirmed his identification while warning him to proceed carefully with revelations that could complicate an already volatile situation. Williams excused himself from the increasingly tense situation and stepped outside into the warm afternoon air, his fingers already dialing his commanding officer's direct line. The weight of what he had witnessed pressed against his chest as he waited for the connection to establish, knowing that his next words would trigger responses far beyond anything Jackson could imagine. Lieutenant Colonel Peterson answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the brisk efficiency of someone managing multiple crises simultaneously. "Peterson here. What's your status, Williams?" "Sir, I'm at Maggie's Diner off base, and I need to report an incident involving what I believe to be an active duty service member," Williams said, keeping his voice low while maintaining visual contact with the situation inside through the restaurant's front windows. "3 Marines from our base have assaulted someone who I think might be Lieutenant Commander Chun from the Joint Operations briefing." Peterson's silence stretched for several seconds as he processed both the names and implications. "Describe the individual you believe to be Commander Chun," he said finally, his tone shifting to the careful neutrality reserved for potentially explosive situations. "Asian female, approximately 5'6", brown eyes, small scar above left eyebrow," Williams reported while watching Maya continue her methodical cleaning process. "She's responding to military time references, answered her phone with standard protocol, and mentioned transport arriving at 1400 hours. Inside the diner, Maya's phone rang again with the distinctive military communication tone. She answered with the same crisp professionalism that had unnerved Jackson moments earlier. "Chun here," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the windows to where Williams stood monitoring the situation. The brief conversation that followed consisted entirely of military terminology that confirmed Williams' identification beyond any remaining doubt. "Roger that," Maya said into the phone. "Situation is contained, but transport security may be advisable given current circumstances." "Understood. We'll maintain position." Peterson came back on the line with database results that made Williams' blood run cold. "Williams, you need to get those Marines away from Commander Chun immediately," the lieutenant colonel said, his voice tight with barely controlled alarm. "I'm dispatching immediate backup and contacting Admiral Morrison's office for guidance." "Sir, what's Commander Chin's current assignment?" Williams asked, though he suspected the answer would explain the escalating urgency in his commanding officer's voice. "She's rotating to lead SEAL Team 7 after completing a classified assignment that earned her the Medal of Honor 3 months ago," Peterson replied. "The ceremony was restricted to Need Tano personnel, which is why most base personnel haven't seen the publicity photos yet." Williams felt his knees weaken as the full magnitude of Jackson's mistake became clear. A Marine Staff Sergeant had just assaulted a decorated Navy SEAL officer who outranked him by several pay grades and possessed combat credentials that made Jackson's peacetime service look like summer camp. "Sir, "How long until backup arrives?" Williams asked while watching Jackson lean over Maya's table again, apparently preparing for another round of intimidation now that Torres had returned with fresh milkshakes. 12 minutes for MPs, 15 for Admiral Morrison, Peterson said. "Can you maintain eyes on the situation until then?" And Williams, "Under no circumstances should you reveal Commander Chen's identity to those Marines. Let the Admiral handle that conversation personally." Williams acknowledged the orders and ended his call, then returned to the diner where the tension had escalated during his absence. Jackson was now standing directly beside Maya's booth, the fresh milkshake in his hand positioned as an obvious threat while he demanded answers about her background and connections. Maya glanced toward the window where Williams was ending his phone call, then checked her watch again with movements that Jackson interpreted as nervous fidgeting rather than tactical awareness. Her cleaning efforts had removed most of the chocolate from her face, revealing features that Williams now recognized from classified briefings about special operations personnel. Jackson's confidence had partially returned during Williams' absence, reinforced by Torres and Rodriguez, who were encouraging him to press harder for information about Maya's mysterious background. The expensive watch, military phone protocol, and transport coordination suggested connections that could prove either valuable or threatening, depending on how they chose to handle the situation. "You know what I think?" Jackson announced to his companions while keeping his eyes fixed on Maya. "I think our friend here might be some kind of contractor or intelligence asset. That would explain the fancy equipment and military contacts." Torres nodded enthusiastically at this theory, which allowed them to maintain their narrative of civilian intimidation while acknowledging the evidence of Maya's military connections. "Contractors think they're hot stuff because they work with real military," he said, "but they're still just civilians playing dress-up." Rodriguez suggested they could leverage whatever information Maya possessed for their own benefit, possibly trading silence about her presence in their territory for favors or connections that might advance their careers. The logic appealed to Jackson, who saw an opportunity to transform a simple dominance display into something more profitable. Maya continued her cleaning while listening to their increasingly elaborate theories about her identity and purpose. She made no effort to correct their assumptions or defend herself against their accusations, maintaining the same composed silence that had frustrated Jackson throughout their encounter. Williams re-entered the diner with knowledge that made every word from Jackson's group sound like evidence in a future court-martial proceeding. He positioned himself where he could intervene quickly if the situation escalated further, while counting down the minutes until proper authority arrived to handle what had become a crisis far beyond his ability to resolve. Maya's phone buzzed with another message that she read quickly before typing a brief response. Jackson tried to read over her shoulder again, but she angled the device away while maintaining her focus on the screen. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the military-grade interface, sending information that would soon bring consequences Jackson could never anticipate. The message she sent was brief but comprehensive. Situation report, location secure, estimated time to resolution 12 minutes. Request priority handling given circumstances. The response came back immediately with confirmation that all necessary personnel were en route and authorization to maintain current posture until arrival. Jackson's impatience grew as his demands for information continued to be met with calm resistance, while Williams counted down the minutes until the Marines would discover exactly how catastrophically they had misjudged their victim. Williams approached Jackson's table with the measured steps of someone carrying information that could defuse a dangerous situation, though his orders prevented him from revealing the specifics that would make Jackson understand his peril. "Staff Sergeant," he said, his voice carrying more urgency than his previous attempts at intervention. "I really think you and your men should consider leaving now." Jackson turned away from Maya's table with irritation clearly visible on his face, frustrated that another NCO was attempting to interfere with what he considered a perfectly justified civilian correction. "Sergeant Williams," he said with the authority of someone who outranked the messenger, "I appreciate your concern, but this situation is well in hand. We're just having conversation with someone who needs to learn proper respect." Williams glanced toward Maya, who had paused in her cleaning to observe this exchange with the calm attention of someone accustomed to monitoring multiple threat vectors simultaneously. The chocolate stains had been mostly removed from her face, revealing features that carried a composed alertness Williams now recognized from classified briefings about special operations personnel. "Sir, I'm telling you this is a mistake," Williams said, choosing his words carefully to avoid violating his orders while still attempting to prevent the catastrophe he knew was approaching. "This isn't what it appears to be, and you really don't want to be here when backup arrives." Jackson's suspicion flared at the mention of backup, confirming his theory that Maya possessed connections or information valuable enough to warrant official protection. "What kind of backup?" he demanded, his confidence wavering slightly as he processed the implications of Williams' warning. Before Williams could respond, the distinctive sound of military vehicles became audible in the distance, their engines carrying the particular note of official government transportation that made Jackson's stomach tighten with the first real fear he had experienced since entering the diner. Torres noticed the approaching vehicles first, his attention drawn to the parking lot where two official sedans with government plates were pulling in alongside a military police vehicle that bore the unmistakable markings of base security. The convoy's arrival confirmed that whatever situation they had stumbled into was far more serious than a simple civilian intimidation. Maya's phone buzzed again, and this time she answered immediately with a response that sent chills through everyone within hearing distance. "Chun here," she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to coordinating with high-level officials. "Yes, sir. Situation is stable. No medical attention required." "Roger that. I'll remain in position." The military police vehicle disgorged two MPs in full dress uniform, their polished brass and crisp creases creating an immediate contrast with the casual workout gear worn by Jackson's group. The lead MP approached the diner's entrance with the purposeful stride of someone executing official orders rather than responding to a routine call. Jackson's confidence began its final collapse as he realized that Maya's mysterious connections were materializing in the form of official military intervention. His earlier theories about contractors and intelligence assets seemed increasingly naive as evidence mounted that he had assaulted someone with the authority to summon immediate backup from base security. Rodriguez moved closer to the window, his face pale as he watched more vehicles arrive in what was clearly a coordinated response rather than coincidental timing. The precision of the arrival suggested planning and communication that reached far beyond anything a civilian contractor could mobilize on short notice. The lead MP entered the diner and immediately scanned the room before focusing on Maya's table with the recognition of someone who had been briefed on exactly what to expect. "Ma'am," he said, approaching her booth with respectful attention that contrasted sharply with Jackson's earlier aggression. "We've been instructed to check on your status and provide any assistance you might require." Maya looked up from her final napkin, chocolate completely removed from her face but still clinging to her hair and clothing. "Thank you, Corporal," she replied, her voice carrying the easy authority of someone accustomed to interacting with military personnel. "The situation has been contained, though I may need a few more minutes to complete cleanup before transport arrives." Jackson tried to process the interaction he was witnessing, but the respectful deference shown by the MP toward someone he had been treating as a powerless civilian created cognitive dissonance that threatened his ability to maintain his grip on reality. Military police did not address contractors or intelligence assets with a formal respect typically reserved for superior officers. The lead MP's attention shifted to Jackson with the cold assessment of someone trained to identify threats and evaluate their potential for escalation. "Sir," he said, his tone carrying none of the respect he had shown Maya, "I need to see your identification and get a statement about what occurred here this afternoon." Jackson fumbled for his military ID with hands that had begun to shake as the implications of official investigation became impossible to ignore. "Staff Sergeant Kevin Jackson," he said, his voice lacking the confidence that had characterized his earlier performance. "I'm stationed at Camp Pendleton with the 3rd Marine Division." The MP reviewed Jackson's identification while radioing the information back to base security for immediate database verification. Jackson's service record would soon be under scrutiny by officials who possessed the authority to end his career with a single phone call, though he remained unaware of exactly how much trouble he was facing. Maya's phone rang again, and her response confirmed that the situation was escalating far beyond anything Jackson had anticipated when he decided to teach a civilian about respect. "Chin here," she said into the device. "Yes, Admiral, I'm fine." "No, sir, just some cleanup required." ETA, still on schedule for 1400 hours. The mention of an admiral in direct communication with Maya sent the final fragments of Jackson's confidence into complete collapse. Admirals did not maintain personal contact with civilian contractors, and they certainly did not coordinate transport schedules for intelligence assets of questionable authority. Williams watched Jackson's face go white as the Marine finally began to understand that his victim possessed rank and authority that made his assault not just inappropriate, but potentially treasonous, depending on how the situation was classified by investigating officials. The lead MP completed his radio communication and returned his attention to Jackson with an expression that suggested the database results had not been favorable to the Marine's prospects for avoiding serious consequences. "Sir, you and your companions need to remain available for questioning," he said, his tone carrying the unmistakable authority of someone delivering orders rather than making requests. Maya checked her watch again, noting that transport would arrive within minutes to remove her from a situation that had already provided enough evidence for whatever official response Admiral Morrison deemed appropriate for Marines who assaulted decorated SEAL officers. The lead MP finished reviewing Jackson's identification and radioed the information to base headquarters, his voice carrying the clipped efficiency of someone reporting a situation that required immediate command attention. "Base security, this is Unit 7. Requesting immediate background verification on Staff Sergeant Kevin Jackson, service number 28479-156, currently involved in an incident requiring command review." Jackson's hands trembled as he processed the implications of having his service record pulled for command review, a procedure typically reserved for serious infractions that threatened careers and security clearances. The casual civilian intimidation that had seemed so justified minutes earlier was now being treated as an official incident requiring investigation by superior officers. The radio crackled with a response that made Jackson's blood freeze in his veins. "Unit 7, be advised that Staff Sergeant Jackson is currently under administrative review for 3 previous civilian harassment complaints filed in the past 6 months. Command is en route with Admiral Morrison for immediate situation assessment." Torres and Rodriguez exchanged panicked glances as they realized their association with Jackson's behavior pattern was about to become part of an official investigation involving flag rank officers. Their earlier enthusiasm for teaching civilians respect had evaporated completely as evidence mounted that they had participated in assaulting someone with the authority to summon admirals for immediate response. Maya finished her final cleaning efforts and folded the last chocolate-stained napkin with the precise movements of someone accustomed to maintaining order even in chaotic circumstances. She glanced toward the window where additional official vehicles were arriving, their government plates and security details indicating that whoever was coming possessed significant authority. The lead MP approached Maya's table again, his demeanor showing the respectful attention typically reserved for superior officers rather than civilian contractors or intelligence assets. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "Admiral Morrison's ETA is approximately 4 minutes. Do you require medical documentation or evidence collection for the assault that occurred?" Maya considered the question while observing Jackson's increasing panic as he realized that his actions were being classified as assault rather than appropriate civilian correction. "I'll defer to the Admiral's guidance on official procedures," she replied, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to making decisions under pressure. Jackson attempted to interrupt the conversation between Maya and the MP, his desperation driving him to seek clarification about charges and procedures that might affect his career prospects. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cracking with stress, "but I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding about what happened here." The MP turned toward Jackson with the cold assessment of someone trained to evaluate threats and maintain order during volatile situations. "Sir, you'll have the opportunity to provide your statement when Admiral Morrison arrives," he said, his tone carrying none of the respect he had shown Maya. "Until then, you and your companions will remain available for questioning." Williams positioned himself near the diner's entrance, watching the parking lot fill with official vehicles that confirmed the situation had escalated far beyond anything Jackson could have anticipated when he decided to teach a civilian about military respect. The precision of the response suggested coordination at levels that reached deep into the command structure. Maya's phone rang again with the military communication tone that had first alerted Jackson to her possible connections. "Chun here," she answered, her response carrying the crisp professionalism that had unnerved him throughout their encounter. "Yes, sir. MPs are on scene and situation is secure. No resistance from involved personnel." Jackson tried to process the conversation he was overhearing, but Maya's obvious familiarity with military protocol and direct communication with flag rank officers created a picture that threatened everything he had believed about the situation since entering the diner. "Roger that, sir." Maya continued into her phone. "Transport can proceed as scheduled. I'll be ready for pickup in approximately 2 minutes. The Admiral's investigation can proceed without my presence if preferred." The mention of proceeding without her presence sent Jackson into complete panic as he realized that Maya possessed the authority to leave while he remained behind to face whatever consequences Admiral Morrison deemed appropriate for Marines who assaulted decorated officers. Torres moved closer to Jackson, his voice barely above a whisper as he asked the question that had been growing in all their minds. "Sarge, what if she's not a civilian? What if we just attack someone who actually outranks us?" Jackson's face went ashen as he processed the implications of his subordinate's question, while Rodriguez backed away from their table as though distance might somehow reduce his culpability in whatever offense they had committed against someone with the authority to summon immediate flag rank intervention. The sound of additional vehicles arriving drew everyone's attention to the parking lot, where a black sedan with Admiral's flags was pulling up alongside the existing convoy of official transportation. The precision timing suggested coordination that reached the highest levels of military command, confirming that Maya's assault was being treated as a serious incident requiring immediate flag rank attention. Maya checked her watch one final time, noting that her scheduled transport would arrive within minutes to remove her from a situation that had provided more than enough evidence for whatever disciplinary action Admiral Morrison deemed appropriate for Marines who targeted superior officers. Williams watched Admiral Morrison's vehicle with the fascination of someone witnessing a career-ending event unfold in real time, while Jackson's group huddled together in desperate consultation about how to minimize their exposure to consequences they were only beginning to understand. The lead MP received final radio confirmation and approached Jackson with information that would shatter any remaining hope the Marine possessed about avoiding serious repercussions. "Sir, Admiral Morrison has been briefed on the situation and will be conducting immediate interviews with all involved personnel," he announced, his tone carrying the finality of someone delivering judgment rather than merely reporting procedures. Maya stood and gathered her ruined book, the chocolate-stained pages serving as evidence of an assault that would soon trigger consequences far beyond anything Jackson had imagined when he decided to teach someone he perceived as a powerless civilian about proper respect for military authority. The black sedan came to a precise stop outside Maggie's diner as Admiral Rebecca Morrison emerged from the passenger seat, her dress uniform displaying ribbons that told the story of 3 decades spent commanding respect throughout the military hierarchy. The 2-star flags on her vehicle left no doubt about her authority, while her purposeful stride toward the diner entrance carried the weight of someone accustomed to resolving crises that could destroy careers with a single decision. The entire diner fell silent as Admiral Morrison entered, her presence commanding immediate attention from everyone present regardless of their military affiliation or civilian status. Her eyes swept the room with the tactical assessment of someone trained to evaluate situations quickly and completely before taking action that would determine the fate of everyone involved. Jackson felt his remaining composure collapse entirely as he realized that a flag-rank officer had personally responded to what he had believed was a simple civilian correction incident. Admirals did not leave their offices to investigate routine harassment complaints, which meant that either Maya possessed connections that reached the highest levels of command or his assault had been classified as something far more serious than inappropriate behavior. Admiral Morrison's attention focused immediately on Maya, who had risen from her booth and assumed the military bearing that had been carefully concealed throughout her encounter with Jackson's group. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable to anyone trained in recognizing the difference between civilian posture and military discipline. "Lieutenant Commander Chun," Admiral Morrison said, her voice carrying across the silent diner with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "I apologize for the delay in response. Are you injured or in need of medical attention?" The formal address hit Jackson like a physical blow as he processed the rank and title that confirmed his worst fears about the identity of his victim. Lieutenant Commander was a senior officer rank that placed Maya several pay grades above his own position, making his assault not just inappropriate, but a direct violation of military hierarchy and chain of command. Maya straightened to full attention, her civilian clothes unable to conceal the military bearing that emerged automatically in the presence of superior authority. "No injury requiring medical attention, Admiral," she replied, her voice carrying the crisp professionalism that Jackson had misinterpreted as civilian nervousness throughout their encounter. Admiral Morrison's gaze shifted to Jackson with the cold assessment of someone evaluating a threat to military discipline and institutional integrity. "Marine," she said, her tone carrying none of the respect she had shown Maya, "explain why a decorated Navy SEAL officer is covered in food and requiring cleanup assistance." Jackson's mouth opened and closed without producing sound as he struggled to formulate a response that might somehow minimize his culpability in assaulting a superior officer who possessed combat credentials that made his peacetime service appear insignificant by comparison. Torres and Rodriguez pressed themselves against the far wall as they realized their association with Jackson's behavior had made them accessories to an offense that could result in court-martial proceedings and dishonorable discharge for military service they had spent years building. "Sir," Jackson finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't know she was military personnel. She was in civilian clothes and didn't identify herself as an officer when I approached her table." Admiral Morrison's expression showed no sympathy for Jackson's explanation as she processed his admission that he had assaulted someone based purely on assumptions about their civilian status and perceived vulnerability. "Marine," she said, her voice carrying the dangerous calm that preceded career-ending decisions, "are you telling me that you believe military personnel in civilian clothes are appropriate targets for harassment and physical assault?" The question trapped Jackson in a logical contradiction that exposed the fundamental flaw in his justification for attacking Maya. Admitting that civilian clothes made assault acceptable would demonstrate contempt for basic human dignity, while claiming he would have behaved differently toward identified military personnel would prove he had targeted Maya specifically because he believed she was defenseless. Maya observed this exchange with the calm attention of someone accustomed to watching superior officers deliver consequences to subordinates who had violated military standards. Her chocolate-stained clothing served as evidence of an assault that would soon trigger disciplinary action far beyond anything Jackson had anticipated. Admiral Morrison turned back to Maya with the respectful attention typically reserved for decorated combat veterans whose service records commanded institutional respect. "Commander Chun, do you wish to file formal charges for assault on a federal officer, or would you prefer to handle this through administrative channels?" Maya considered the question while observing Jackson's complete collapse as he realized that his fate now depended on the mercy of someone he had humiliated in front of witnesses. "I defer to your judgment on appropriate disciplinary measures, Admiral," she replied, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to making decisions under pressure. The Admiral's nod indicated that Maya's response had sealed Jackson's fate according to military justice protocols that would ensure his behavior received consequences commensurate with assaulting a superior officer. "Marine," she said, turning back to Jackson with finality that brooked no appeal, "you'll be placed under immediate arrest pending court-martial proceedings for assault on a commissioned officer." Jackson's knees buckled as he processed the reality that his career was ending in a diner where he had expected to demonstrate his authority over someone he had perceived as powerless. The Medal of Honor recipient he had attacked possessed the patience to allow him to destroy himself completely before revealing the truth that would haunt him for the remainder of his shortened military service. Williams watched from the entrance as military police moved to formally arrest Jackson, while Torres and Rodriguez faced their own reckoning for participating in the assault of a decorated SEAL officer whose combat credentials made their peacetime service appear trivial by comparison. Admiral Morrison checked her watch with the same precision Maya had displayed throughout the encounter, noting that the scheduled transport would arrive momentarily to remove a decorated officer from the scene of an incident that would serve as a cautionary tale about the consequences of underestimating people based on appearances. Maya gathered her ruined book while chocolate continued to cling to her hair, the physical evidence of Jackson's assault serving as a permanent reminder that assumptions about vulnerability could prove catastrophically wrong when applied to people whose service records included accomplishments that most military personnel could never imagine achieving. The lead MP approached Jackson with handcuffs that gleamed under the diner's fluorescent lighting, their metallic clicks serving as the final punctuation mark on a career that had ended the moment he decided to assault someone he perceived as defenseless. "Staff Sergeant Kevin Jackson, you're under arrest for assault on a commissioned officer of the United States Navy," the MP announced, his voice carrying the formal authority of military justice being executed. Jackson's hands shook as the restraints secured around his wrists, the cold metal serving as a tangible reminder that his 20-year military career was concluding in disgrace rather than the honorable retirement he had planned. His family's financial security, his veterans' benefits, and his post-service employment prospects were evaporating as consequences of a decision that had seemed so justified minutes earlier. Torres and Rodriguez found themselves flanked by additional MPs who had arrived with Admiral Morrison's convoy, their faces pale as they realized their enthusiastic participation in Jackson's assault had made them accessories to a federal crime. Their earlier laughter at Maya's humiliation now seemed like evidence of premeditation rather than spontaneous military camaraderie. Admiral Morrison addressed the two corporals with the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with discipline problems that threaten military integrity. "You will be detained for questioning as material witnesses and potential accomplices," she informed them, her tone carrying none of the sympathy typically reserved for junior personnel who made mistakes through inexperience rather than malice. Maya watched these proceedings with the calm attention of someone who had witnessed justice being administered in far more chaotic circumstances than a small-town diner. Her chocolate-stained clothing served as evidence that would appear in court-martial records, though she maintained the composed bearing of someone accustomed to testifying about events that carried life-and-death consequences. Jackson attempted to speak as the MPs prepared to escort him to the detention vehicle, his voice cracking with desperation as he tried to formulate an apology that might somehow reduce the severity of consequences he was facing. "Commander Chun," he said, his earlier arrogance replaced by the pleading tone of someone whose future depended on mercy from his victim. Maya turned toward Jackson with the same measured attention she had shown throughout their encounter, though the power dynamic had shifted completely now that his true position in the military hierarchy had been exposed. "Staff Sergeant," she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through accomplishments rather than demanded it through intimidation. Jackson waited for her response with the desperate hope of someone clinging to the possibility that his career might still be salvaged through a superior officer's compassion, though his assault on a Medal of Honor recipient made clemency unlikely regardless of Maya's personal preferences about pursuing charges. Your behavior today demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of military values, Maya continued, her words carrying the weight of someone whose combat experience gave her authority to speak about honor and service. The uniform represents something larger than personal authority or the right to intimidate people you perceive as vulnerable. Admiral Morrison observed this exchange with the attention of someone evaluating how a decorated officer handled the aftermath of being assaulted by subordinates who had targeted her based on assumptions about her defenselessness. Maya's response would become part of the official record and potentially influence sentencing recommendations. Torres found his voice long enough to attempt his own desperate appeal for leniency, though his participation in the assault had been enthusiastic enough to eliminate most mitigating factors. "Ma'am," he said to Maya, his voice barely audible above the sound of radio communications and official procedures. "We're sorry. We didn't know who you were." Maya's attention shifted to Torres with the same calm assessment she had maintained throughout the encounter, though her response carried implications that would haunt him long after his military service concluded. "The problem with your apology, Corporal, is that it suggests you believe assault is acceptable when the victim cannot retaliate or summon help." Rodriguez remained silent as he processed Maya's observation about the fundamental flaw in their behavior, recognizing that their actions had been motivated by perceived power imbalance rather than any legitimate military purpose. His career prospects were dimming as evidence mounted that their assault had been premeditated rather than a spontaneous misunderstanding. Admiral Morrison checked her watch as Maya's scheduled transport became audible in the distance, its approach signaling the end of an incident that would generate paperwork, investigations, and consequences that would follow the involved Marines for years. "Commander Chun, your transport has arrived," she announced, though her tone suggested the investigation would continue regardless of Maya's presence. Maya gathered her ruined belongings while Jackson was led toward the detention vehicle, his handcuffed hands serving as visible proof that assumptions about civilian vulnerability could prove catastrophically wrong when applied to people whose service records included accomplishments that commanded institutional respect. Williams approached Admiral Morrison with the careful steps of someone seeking permission to speak with flag-rank authority about events he had witnessed. "Admiral," he said respectfully, "I tried to warn Staff Sergeant Jackson that he was making a mistake, but he refused to listen to guidance about backing down." Admiral Morrison's nod acknowledged Williams' attempt at intervention, while recognizing that Jackson's pattern of civilian harassment had made this confrontation inevitable regardless of warnings for better-informed personnel. "Your recognition of Commander Chun and attempt to prevent escalation will be noted in the official report, Sergeant Williams," she replied. Maya's transport arrived precisely on schedule, its government plates and security escort confirming that her movements were coordinated at levels that reached deep into the command structure. The vehicle's arrival marked the end of an encounter that had begun with Jackson's confidence and concluded with his complete destruction. Jackson was loaded into the detention vehicle as Maya prepared to depart, their opposing trajectories serving as a stark reminder that military justice moved swiftly when decorated officers were assaulted by subordinates who had mistaken their civilian clothes for evidence of vulnerability. Admiral Morrison watched both vehicles prepare to leave, knowing that the paperwork and investigations triggered by Jackson's assault would serve as a cautionary tale about the importance of recognizing that appearances could be deceiving when dealing with people whose service records included accomplishments that most military personnel could never imagine achieving. Admiral Morrison returned to base headquarters with the grim knowledge that Jackson's assault represented a symptom of broader cultural problems that required immediate institutional attention. Her first priority was briefing the base commander about an incident that would generate media attention, congressional inquiries, and demands for systemic reforms to prevent future assaults on decorated personnel. The investigation expanded within hours as other victims of Jackson's harassment pattern came forward with complaints they had previously been afraid to file. 3 civilians reported similar incidents at local establishments, while 2 junior enlisted personnel described workplace intimidation that had gone unreported due to fear of retaliation from Jackson's supporters. Maya's SEAL team commander received notification of the assault through official channels that bypassed normal communication protocols, triggering immediate concern about whether their team leader required medical attention or support services. The fact that a Medal of Honor recipient had been targeted by subordinate personnel sent shockwaves through the special operations community. Base security reviewed surveillance footage from previous incidents mentioned in Jackson's expanding file, discovering a pattern of behavior that revealed systematic targeting of anyone he perceived as vulnerable or unable to retaliate effectively. The documentation painted a picture of predatory behavior that had been escalating for months without proper intervention. Torres and Rodriguez faced separate interrogations that revealed the extent of their participation in Jackson's harassment campaigns, with investigators uncovering social media posts that celebrated their previous civilian intimidation incidents as examples of proper military assertiveness. Their defense attorneys struggled to find mitigating factors and evidence that demonstrated premeditation rather than spontaneous misconduct. Williams received commendation for his recognition of Maya's military bearing and his attempts to prevent escalation, though his testimony revealed that Jackson had dismissed multiple warnings from personnel who recognized the danger of his aggressive behavior. The pattern suggested institutional failure to address known problems before they escalated to assault. Maya arrived at her new assignment to find that word of the incident had preceded her through channels that carried news faster than official communications. Her new team expressed both pride in her composure under assault and anger that anyone had dared to target their commanding officer based on assumptions about her vulnerability. The court-martial proceedings began within 48 hours as military justice moved with unusual speed to address an incident that threatened public confidence in military discipline and professionalism. Jackson's defense team attempted to portray the assault as a misunderstanding between personnel who failed to recognize each other's status, but video evidence from the diner's security cameras contradicted claims about mistaken identity. Jackson's wife filed for divorce before the court-martial concluded, citing irreconcilable differences that stemmed from his pattern of aggressive behavior and the financial devastation his misconduct would bring to their family. His children faced the social stigma of having a father whose assault on a war hero had become national news. Admiral Morrison testified about the broader implications of allowing harassment to continue unchecked, explaining how Jackson's behavior had created an environment where decorated personnel could be targeted based purely on appearances rather than actual military status. Her testimony emphasized that military values required protecting all personnel regardless of their ability to retaliate. The defense attempted to introduce Maya's classified service record to argue that her dangerous reputation should have been apparent to anyone with military experience. But the judge ruled that classified accomplishments could not be used to justify assault by personnel who lacked proper security clearances to access such information. Maya's testimony proved devastating to Jackson's defense as she recounted his escalating aggression with the precision of someone accustomed to providing accurate intelligence under pressure. Her calm recital of events demonstrated that his assault had been deliberate rather than spontaneous, methodical rather than emotional. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges related to assault on a commissioned officer, with additional convictions for conduct unbecoming and violation of military regulations regarding civilian interaction. Jackson's sentence included dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all military benefits, and federal assault charges that would follow him into civilian life. Torres and Rodriguez received administrative punishment that allowed them to retain their positions while serving probationary periods that would determine whether they could rebuild their careers after participating in assault on a superior officer. Their futures depended on demonstrating genuine reform rather than simply avoiding additional misconduct. Base-wide mandatory training sessions were implemented to address recognition protocols that would prevent future incidents involving personnel in civilian clothes, with Maya's case serving as the primary example of how assumptions about vulnerability could prove catastrophically wrong when applied to decorated combat veterans. Maya declined interview requests from media outlets that wanted to explore her story, preferring to focus on her new assignment rather than becoming a spokesperson for military discipline issues. Her team respected her privacy while taking pride in serving under someone whose composure under assault had become legendary within special operations circles. Admiral Morrison announced policy changes that would make civilian harassment a career-ending offense regardless of the victim's ability to retaliate or seek help, with Jackson's case serving as proof that military values required protecting all community members rather than just those capable of defending themselves. The incident report became required reading at military academies nationwide, where cadets studied Maya's response as an example of maintaining military bearing under extreme provocation while allowing justice to proceed through proper channels rather than taking personal revenge that could compromise institutional integrity. Maya's integration into SEAL Team 7 proceeded with the seamless efficiency of personnel who had been thoroughly briefed about their new commanding officer's background and recent experiences. Word of the diner incident had spread through special operations channels, creating an atmosphere of respect that acknowledged both her combat accomplishments and her restraint when assaulted by ignorant subordinates. Her team members expressed their admiration through actions rather than words, maintaining the professional standards that reflected well on someone whose reputation had been enhanced rather than damaged by her composed response to Jackson's attack. The chocolate milkshake assault had become a cautionary tale about underestimating people based on appearances. Williams received his transfer orders to Maya's command structure within 2 weeks of the incident, his recognition of her military bearing and attempts to prevent escalation having impressed Admiral Morrison enough to recommend him for advancement opportunities. His new position carried increased responsibilities that reflected institutional appreciation for personnel who demonstrated proper judgment under pressure. The court-martial proceedings concluded with Jackson receiving maximum sentencing that included dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all military benefits, and federal assault charges that would follow him into whatever civilian career remained available to someone with his criminal record. His 20-year military service had been erased by 15 minutes of poor judgment in a small-town diner. Jackson's federal trial began 6 months after his military conviction, with Maya testifying again about the assault that had destroyed his career and reputation. Her precise recollection of events provided prosecutors with testimony that demolished his defense team's attempts to portray the incident as a misunderstanding between confused personnel. The civilian jury showed no sympathy for Jackson's claims about military culture or stressed civilian relations, focusing instead on video evidence that showed a large man deliberately humiliating a smaller woman who had posed no threat to anyone. His federal conviction carried additional penalties that ensured his assault would haunt him for years beyond his military punishment. Torres and Rodriguez completed their probationary periods with mixed results, as Torres demonstrated genuine reform through community service and sensitivity training, while Rodriguez struggled to overcome the aggressive attitudes that had made him an enthusiastic participant in Jackson's harassment campaigns. Their divergent paths illustrated how individual character determined whether someone could rebuild their career after participating in misconduct. Base harassment incidents dropped dramatically following implementation of new policies that made civilian intimidation a career-ending offense regardless of the victim's ability to retaliate. Jackson's case had provided stark evidence that assumptions about vulnerability could prove catastrophically wrong, creating institutional awareness that protected all community members. Maya's SEAL team achieved outstanding performance ratings on their first joint operation under her leadership, with team members crediting her calm under pressure and strategic thinking for mission success that exceeded all expectations. Her ability to maintain composure when assaulted by Marines had convinced them she could handle anything combat might present. Admiral Morrison cited Maya's case during congressional testimony about military discipline and civilian relations, explaining how proper leadership required protecting all community members rather than allowing harassment to continue unchecked. Her composed response to assault had become an example of military values in action. Williams earned promotion to Staff Sergeant ahead of normal schedule, His recognition of Maya's true status and attempts to prevent escalation having demonstrated the kind of judgment that military leadership valued in personnel destined for increased responsibility. His career trajectory illustrated how proper behavior during crisis situations could accelerate advancement. The diner incident became required study material at the Naval Academy, where midshipmen analyzed Maya's response as an example of maintaining military bearing under extreme provocation while allowing justice to proceed through proper channels. Her restraint had prevented escalation that could have compromised institutional integrity. Jackson's wife completed their divorce proceedings and relocated with their children to eliminate association with his criminal conviction and dishonorable discharge. His assault on a war hero had created social stigma that extended to family members who bore no responsibility for his misconduct but suffered consequences nonetheless. Maya declined book deals and speaking opportunities that would have capitalized on her story, preferring to focus on operational responsibilities rather than becoming a celebrity spokesperson for military discipline issues. Her team respected her privacy while taking pride in serving under someone whose legend continued growing within special operations circles. Torres successfully completed his rehabilitation program and earned assignment to a new unit where his reformed attitudes and genuine remorse for participating in Jackson's assault helped him rebuild a career that had nearly ended in disgrace. His transformation demonstrated that some personnel could learn from catastrophic mistakes. Rodriguez faced administrative separation after failing to demonstrate genuine reform during his probationary period. His continued aggressive attitudes toward civilians proving that some individuals could not overcome the character flaws that had made them enthusiastic participants in harassment campaigns. His discharge served as evidence that second chances required genuine change. Admiral Morrison retired with the satisfaction of knowing that Maya's case had triggered policy changes that would protect future victims of harassment while ensuring that military values extended beyond just protecting personnel capable of defending themselves. The institutional reforms represented her lasting legacy as a flag officer. Maya continued her distinguished service without discussing the diner incident publicly. Though her composed response to assault had become legendary within military circles where her ability to maintain bearing under attack was cited as evidence of the character that had earned her a Medal of Honor for actions that remained classified but were universally respected. 18 months after the incident at Maggie's Diner, Maya stood before a fresh class of SEAL candidates who represented the next generation of special operations personnel. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy as these elite warriors prepared to learn from someone whose reputation had been forged through accomplishments that remained largely classified but universally respected. Her appearance revealed no trace of the chocolate milkshake that had once covered her hair and clothing, though the lesson that assault had taught about assumptions and appearances would shape how she trained personnel who might one day face similar tests of character and restraint. Jackson served his federal sentence in a minimum security facility where his former military status provided no protection from fellow inmates who viewed assault on war heroes as particularly contemptible behavior. His days were spent in menial labor that bore no resemblance to the authority he had once wielded as a Marine Staff Sergeant. The training session Maya conducted focused on recognition protocols and proper military bearing, with emphasis on how decorated personnel could be found in any setting regardless of their clothing or apparent vulnerability. Her students listened with the intense attention of warriors who understood that assumptions could prove fatal in both combat and civilian environments. Williams had earned his second promotion since the diner incident, his career trajectory reflecting institutional appreciation for personnel who demonstrated proper judgment when others failed to recognize dangerous situations. His assignment as Maya's senior enlisted advisor placed him in position to share lessons learned from witnessing career-ending mistakes. Torres completed his community service requirements and earned assignment to a prestigious unit where his reformed attitudes and genuine remorse for past misconduct had convinced leadership that some individuals could learn from catastrophic mistakes. His transformation served as proof that character flaws could be overcome through sustained effort and genuine commitment to change. Maya's lesson plan included case studies of military personnel who had been targeted based on appearances, with her own experience serving as the primary example of how wrong assumptions about civilian status could destroy careers in minutes. Her students absorbed these lessons with the seriousness of professionals whose futures depended on avoiding similar mistakes. Admiral Morrison's policy changes have been adopted throughout the military establishment, creating institutional awareness that protected all community members regardless of their ability to retaliate against harassment or assault. Jackson's case had provided the stark evidence needed to convince skeptics that reforms were necessary. Rodriguez faced civilian employment challenges that reflected his dishonorable discharge and the character issues that had prevented successful rehabilitation during his probationary period. His inability to find stable work served as a reminder that military service provided opportunities that could be permanently lost through poor judgment and aggressive behavior. The SEAL candidates before Maya represented diverse backgrounds and experiences, but they shared the common trait of having earned their positions through demonstrated excellence rather than assumptions about who deserved respect based on appearances. Her training would prepare them to extend that same principle to everyone they encountered. Jackson's family had moved across the country to escape association with his criminal conviction and the national attention his assault on a Medal of Honor recipient had generated. His children faced questions about their father's behavior that would follow them into adulthood despite bearing no responsibility for his choices. Maya concluded her training session with a simple directive that carried the weight of hard-earned experience. Military bearing should be visible in every interaction, regardless of whether you're in uniform or civilian clothes, she told her students. The values we represent don't disappear when we change our appearance. Williams observed the training from the back of the room, remembering the calm composure Maya had maintained while covered in chocolate and facing aggressive Marines who had no idea they were destroying their careers. Her ability to teach those lessons without bitterness impressed him as much as her restraint during the original incident. The story of Maya's assault had become part of military folklore, passed down through generations of personnel who learned about the importance of treating everyone with respect regardless of their apparent status or ability to retaliate. Her composed response had created a teaching moment that would influence military culture for decades. After the training session concluded, one young SEAL candidate approached Maya with a question that reflected how her story had shaped current military thinking. "Ma'am," he asked respectfully, "how do we maintain that kind of composure when people underestimate us or treat us badly?" Maya considered the question while remembering the chocolate dripping from her hair and the satisfaction she had felt watching Jackson realize his mistake too late to save his career. "You remember that your actions represent something larger than personal pride?" she replied. "Justice works best when we allow it to proceed through proper channels rather than taking matters into our own hands." The candidate nodded with understanding that reflected how Maya's restraint had become legendary within special operations circles, where her ability to maintain military bearing under assault was cited as evidence of the character that had earned her decorations for classified actions. As the candidates filed out of the training facility, Maya remained behind to review lesson plans that would shape how future military personnel approach civilian interactions and recognition protocols. Her chocolate-stained experience had created institutional changes that protected people like herself while ensuring that assumptions about vulnerability would not destroy more careers. Is there anything about this incredible story that resonates with your own experiences with people making assumptions about you? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone completely misjudged your capabilities or background? I'd love to hear your thoughts about how we can all do better at treating others with respect regardless of how they appear to us. The legacy of that afternoon in Maggie's Diner continued to influence military culture through personnel who carried forward lessons about respect, recognition, and the dangerous consequences of underestimating people based on appearances alone.